8:44 a.m. The South China Sea, 107 miles east of the Spratly Islands. Sky overcast, ceiling at 3,000 feet. Light rain moving in from the northwest, visibility reducing. The sea was running a moderate swell from the northeast, nothing that would challenge a vessel of any serious size, but enough to set the smaller research craft rolling gently at their work. The kind of morning where the ocean feels patient and indifferent, gray and wide and going about its ancient business, regardless of whatever human concerns were unfolding on its surface. The USNS Silas Bent was not a warship. She was an oceanographic survey vessel, 5,800 tons, unarmed, operated by the Military Sealift Command and crewed by a combination of civilian mariners and civilian scientists from 3 American research universities. On this particular Tuesday morning, 41 personnel were aboard. 23 civilian mariners running the ship's operations, 18 researchers and technicians from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the Applied Research Laboratory at Penn State, conducting a seabed mapping survey of the Spratly Trough that had been authorized, funded, and publicly announced 9 months earlier. The survey was legitimate. The authorization was proper. The waters were international. Every element of the operation was precisely as described in the mission documentation filed with the International Hydrographic Organization. None of that mattered to the Three People's Liberation Army Navy, Type 056 corvettes, that emerged from the low visibility to the northwest at 8:44 a.m. and took up positions around the USNS Silas Bent in a triangular formation that left no avenue of maneuver. The lead corvette's bridge broadcast on VHF Channel 16 in English, clearly, without ambiguity. The USNS Silas Bent was operating in sovereign Chinese waters. The vessel was ordered to cease all operations, heave to, and prepare to receive a boarding party. Failure to comply would result in the use of force. The corvette's 76mm deck gun was trained directly at the Silas Bent's bridge. The Silas Bent's commanding officer complied. He had no choice. He had no weapons. He had 41 people aboard. He transmitted a flash distress signal on the emergency frequency and ordered his crew to stand by for boarding. The planned boarding party, 2 rigid inflatable boats, 26 armed naval personnel, and came aboard at 8:57 a.m. The 41 American civilians were moved to the ship's main research lab under armed escort. The Silas Bent's communication systems were disabled. Her navigation was taken over by the planned boarding party. At 9:14 a.m., the ship began moving northwest, under plan control, toward Fiery Cross Reef, the largest of China's artificially constructed island facilities in the Spratlys, home to a 3-kilometer runway, a naval pier complex, a barracks facility, and a substantial garrison of PLA Navy and Marine Corps personnel. In Beijing, the decision to board and seize the Silas Bent had been made 48 hours earlier, at a meeting of the Central Military Commission that had included the director of the State Oceanic Administration and the commander of the South Sea Fleet. The legal pretext was a new interpretation of the Chinese domestic legislation governing maritime research activities in the 9-line area, an interpretation that had been prepared by the Foreign Ministry's Legal Affairs Bureau over the previous 3 months, and that designated any foreign oceanographic survey activity as requiring prior Chinese government approval, regardless of international law. The seizure of the Silas Bent was to be the first enforcement action under this new interpretation. A demonstration, a precedent, a signal to every research institution and naval surveying program in the world that the South China Sea required Chinese permission. The CMC's operational timeline called for the Silas Bent and her 41 personnel to be at Fiery Cross Reef within 5 hours. Once the vessel was docked at the planned pier complex on a Chinese-controlled installation, Beijing calculated the diplomatic leverage would be complete. The United States would be forced to negotiate for the release of its civilian personnel from a position of demonstrated helplessness. The images of an American government vessel at a Chinese military pier, floodlit and surrounded by planned sentries, would circulate globally. The message would be received. The CMC had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: they had selected a boarding target whose position and distress signal would be received, processed, and acted upon before the Silas Bent had traveled 40 miles toward Fiery Cross Reef. The flash distress transmission from the Silas Bent's commanding officer at 8:57 a.m. had been received simultaneously by the P-8 Poseidon Maritime patrol aircraft orbiting at 12,000 feet 60 miles east of the Spratlys, and by the E-2D Hawkeye Airborne from USS Ronald Reagan operating 218 miles to the southeast. Both platforms had been on station since 6 a.m. that morning, because the NSA's collection against planned South Sea Fleet encrypted command traffic had detected abnormal operational activity consistent with a maritime interdiction operation in the Spratly area beginning 36 hours earlier. The Reagan strike group had been repositioning since midnight. At the moment the Silas Bent broadcast her distress signal, the USS Ronald Reagan was already at flight quarters. Armed aircraft were already on the catapults. The second mistake: they believed that moving the Silas Bent to Fiery Cross Reef would create a diplomatic situation that would prevent military action. The opposite was true. The pre-authorized response package, developed by Pacific Fleet and approved by the National Command Authority 14 months earlier, for exactly a scenario involving the seizure of a U.S. government vessel and American civilian personnel, contained a specific provision. The window for action was defined as the period before the vessel reached any Chinese-controlled installation. Once the Silas Bent was secured at a planned facility, the response options changed significantly. This was not a reason to wait. It was a reason to act immediately before the 5-hour window closed. The third mistake: the 3 Type 056 corvettes escorting the Silas Bent northwest were operating without any air defense coverage from Fiery Cross Reef's HQ-9 surface-to-air battery, whose coverage arc did not extend to the seizure location 107 miles east. The corvette's own air defense capability, a single FL-3000N point defense missile system per vessel, was designed to engage subsonic anti-ship missiles at close range, not to provide area air defense against standoff weapons released from beyond visual range. The corvettes were, in air defense terms, nearly naked in the open ocean. Their commanders had not requested additional air cover because the operation had been assessed as low risk. The seizure of an unarmed research vessel was not expected to require fighter support. The fourth mistake: the 26 planned personnel who had boarded the Silas Bent had disabled the ship's external communication systems. They had not found, and did not know about, the compact SATCOM emergency beacon concealed in the chief scientist's equipment locker, a device provided by the Office of Naval Research as a classified emergency communication system for exactly this contingency, capable of transmitting GPS coordinates and a short digital message burst via military satellite on a frequency the plan's communications monitoring equipment was not configured to detect. The chief scientist had activated the beacon at 9:06 a.m., transmitting the Silas Bent's position, heading, speed, and personnel status in a single 8-second burst. That data had been received at Pacific Fleet headquarters at 9:07 a.m., updating the vessel's real-time track with a precision of less than 10 meters. The fifth mistake, the one that determined everything, was the assumption that a response involving force would require at minimum 4 to 6 hours of diplomatic consultation, interagency coordination, and political authorization before initiating action. That assumption was grounded in every previous crisis of this type: the 2001 EP-3 collision, the 2009 USNS Impeccable Harassment, the numerous confrontations in the East and South China Seas over the previous decade. In each of those cases, the U.S. response had been diplomatic, cautious, and slow. The CMC had extrapolated from that pattern with confidence. What had changed, and what Beijing had not assessed, was the pre-authorized response package. There was no 4 to 6 hour consultation window. Authorization had been granted 14 months earlier for exactly this scenario. The execute order required only the confirmation of 3 conditions. American personnel seized, vessel in transit, location confirmed. All 3 conditions were met at 9:07 a.m. The execute order was transmitted at 9:09 a.m., 2 minutes after the beacon data arrived at Pearl Harbor. What happened in the next 61 minutes was the most precisely executed non-combatant evacuation and maritime strike operation in the history of American naval power. At 9:09 a.m., 2 FA-18F Super Hornets from the Reagan's Alert 5 package were catapulted from the flight deck and turned northwest at maximum speed. They carried no air-to-ground weapons. Their mission was combat air patrol, establishing U.S. air superiority over the Silas Bent and her planned escorts. They arrived on station at 9:34 a.m., conducting wide-area radar sweeps and making their presence known to the planned corvette crews via deliberate radar lock-on at close range. The planned corvettes tracked them. The corvettes did not fire. They were not suicidal. 3 corvettes against 2 FA-18Fs was not a fight. Any planned surface commander was going to start unilaterally. At 9:11 a.m., the Reagan launched her first long-range strike package. 8 FA-18E Super Hornets, each carrying 4 AGM-84H/K SLAM-ER precision standoff missiles, turned toward Fiery Cross Reef on pre-planned strike profiles. Their targets were the planned pier complex at Fiery Cross Reef, specifically the 2 additional Type 056 corvettes moored there that intelligence assessed as likely to sortie in support of the seizure operation, and the radar installation at Fiery Cross Reef that was providing tracking data to the planned South Sea Fleet Command. The SLAM-ERs had a range exceeding 270 kilometers. They would be released from beyond any air defense engagement range of the Fiery Cross HQ-9 battery. At 9:14 a.m., the commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 1 authorized the launch of SEAL team insertion from the MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters of the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, that had been pre-positioned at Clark Air Base in the Philippines 40 hours earlier, following the NSA intelligence assessment. 2 MH-60M helicopters, 12 SEAL operators. The mission: board the Silas Bent while she was still in international waters, neutralize the planned boarding party, and secure the 41 American civilians. The legal authority for the operation was the Law of the Sea Convention's provisions on the right of rescue of vessels seized in international waters, combined with the pre-authorized response package's specific provision for non-combatant personnel recovery. The Silas Bent had not yet reached Chinese-controlled waters. She was still in international waters. The 41 Americans aboard her were U.S. government personnel seized at gunpoint by a foreign military force in violation of international law. The response was authorized. It was lawful. It was already inbound. The 2 MH-60Ms departed Clark at 9:17 a.m. at low altitude, flying a nap of Earth profile over the Palawan Passage to stay below planned radar coverage from Fiery Cross Reef and the Paracel Island installations. They carried no visible markings. Their rotor noise was suppressed by the exhaust deflectors the Night Stalkers had been fitting to their aircraft since 2019. They would arrive over the Silas Bent at 10:04 a.m. At 9:31 a.m., the SLAM-ER strike against Fiery Cross Reef executed. 64 precision standoff missiles, released from 8 FA-18Es at ranges between 180 and 230 kilometers from the target, flew their pre-programmed approach routes and arrived over Fiery Cross Reef in a coordinated impact sequence spanning 4 minutes. The 2 planned Type 056 corvettes moored at the pier complex, Yueyang and Jieyang, both preparing to sortie to reinforce the escort group, were struck at their moorings by 6 SLAM-ERs each. Both vessels sustained catastrophic structural damage and were rendered permanently inoperable at pier. The pier infrastructure itself was struck by 8 missiles that collapsed the berthing sections, the fuel transfer lines, and the crane equipment used for resupply operations. The Fiery Cross Reef radar installation, a Type 517H meter-wave air search radar that had been providing tracking data across the Spratly operational area, was struck by 4 SLAM-ERs that collapsed the antenna array and the hardened radar cabin simultaneously. The HQ-9 air defense battery at Fiery Cross attempted to engage the inbound SLAM-ERs. The HQ-9 achieved radar lock on 11 missiles. It fired 8 HQ-9 interceptors. It achieved 3 intercepts. 53 SLAM-ERs reached their assigned targets. At 10:04 a.m., the 2 MH-60Ms arrived over the Silas Bent, 3 miles ahead of schedule. The planned boarding party, 26 personnel distributed across the vessel's research lab, bridge, engineering spaces, and main deck, had been on board for 67 minutes. They were alert. They were armed. They were not, however, expecting what descended on them from above at 10:04 a.m. in the gray morning rain. Out of a low cloud ceiling that had provided perfect concealment for the MH-60M's final approach, 12 SEAL operators fast roped to the Silas Bent's main deck in 22 seconds. The operation that followed lasted 9 minutes and 14 seconds. It was conducted with the precise, rehearsed efficiency of personnel who had trained for exactly this scenario. Maritime vessel recapture, 41 non-combatants to be secured. Hostile boarding party to be neutralized with minimum collateral risk to civilian personnel. The planned boarding party members on the main deck were the first to be encountered. They were overwhelmed within 90 seconds and secured. The bridge team was secured next. The engineering spaces. Finally, the research lab, where all 41 American civilians had been held since 9:14 a.m., was reached at 10:11 a.m. The final 2 planned personnel in the research lab, both in the process of lowering their weapons when the SEAL team entered, were secured without incident. All 41 American civilians were confirmed unharmed at 10:13 a.m. and 19 seconds. At that same moment, 10:13 a.m., the 3 planned Type 056 escort corvettes were processing what was happening around them. They had seen the explosion signatures from Fiery Cross Reef on their radar displays at 9:31 a.m. They had attempted to raise the Fiery Cross command element on radio and received no response. They had watched the 2 FA-18Fs maintaining close cap on their formation for the previous 39 minutes. They had heard, but not located, the helicopter sound that had come from above the Silas Bent at 10:04 a.m. At 10:14 a.m., the lead corvette's commanding officer transmitted on VHF Channel 16 in English, demanding to know what was happening aboard the Silas Bent. The Silas Bent's bridge, now manned by 3 SEAL operators who had restored the vessel's navigation and communication systems, transmitted back on the same frequency. The vessel was operating under U.S. Navy authority. All personnel were secure, and the 3 planned corvettes were ordered to stand clear immediately or be engaged. At 10:16 a.m., 6 additional FA-18Es from the Reagan, the second strike package that had been held in orbit 40 miles east during the SEAL operation, transmitted their radar lock-on to all 3 planned corvettes simultaneously. 3 corvettes, 6 aircraft, each aircraft carrying 4 SLAM-ER missiles. The geometry of the situation was not ambiguous. The lead corvette's commanding officer ordered his formation to stand down and turn away at 10:17 a.m. All 3 corvettes turned southeast at maximum speed. None of them fired a weapon. They were not pursued. The Silas Bent, under SEAL operational control, turned southeast at 10:18 a.m. on a heading that would take her to a rendezvous point with the USS Ronald Reagan by 4:30 p.m. The 41 American civilians were given access to the vessel's galley and medical bay. The chief scientist, who had activated the emergency beacon at 9:06 a.m., was briefed on the operation's outcome by the SEAL team officer at 10:21 a.m. He was described in the after-action report as having received the briefing calmly and professionally, and as having immediately asked when the survey data collected before the boarding could be recovered and processed. The survey data was recovered intact. It was processed and transmitted to the funding institutions within 72 hours. The Spratly Trough Mapping Survey was completed, with modifications to the survey route over the following 3 weeks. The final operational accounting was documented by Pacific Fleet and Indopacom over the subsequent 48 hours. American civilian personnel seized 41. American civilian personnel recovered unharmed, 41. Time in planned custody, 1 hour and 7 minutes. Planned boarding party personnel, 26. All 26 secured and transferred to U.S. Navy custody for processing under international law provisions on piracy and unlawful seizure of vessels. Planned personnel removed from the battle space during the SEAL operation, 0. All 26 were secured with non-lethal force consistent with ROE provisions for a non-combatant rescue operation. They were transferred to Philippine Coast Guard custody at Palawan on the following day, processed under international maritime law, and repatriated to China through diplomatic channels 31 days later. Planned vessels rendered permanently inoperable. Yueyang and Jieyang, both Type 056 corvettes destroyed at Fiery Cross Reef Pier. Fiery Cross Reef radar installation, rendered permanently inoperable. Fiery Cross Reef Pier complex, rendered inoperable. 3 escort corvettes stood down, returned to Sanya Naval Base without further engagement. American personnel casualties across the entire operation, 0. All 12 SEAL operators returned to Clark Air Base aboard the MH-60Ms by 2:30 p.m. No aircraft lost. The Silas Bent sustained no damage beyond what the planned boarding party had done to her communications equipment, which was repaired at Subic Bay within 6 hours of arrival. In Beijing, the Central Military Commission convened at noon. The seizure operation that had been designed to demonstrate Chinese sovereign authority over the South China Sea had produced the following outcomes. 2 corvettes rendered inoperable at pier. Fiery Cross Reef's radar capability eliminated. 41 American civilians recovered and unharmed. 26 planned naval personnel in Philippine custody, and the Silas Bent continuing her survey mission. Satellite imagery of Fiery Cross Reef's pier complex, showing the structural remains of the 2 Type 056 corvettes and the collapsed pier infrastructure, was distributed by Pacific Command at 2 p.m. It circulated globally within 4 hours. The legal theory underpinning the seizure, the new domestic maritime research authorization requirement, was quietly withdrawn from the Foreign Ministry's published legal positions within 72 hours. No formal announcement was made. The document simply ceased to appear on the State Oceanic Administration's website. The Silas Bent arrived at Subic Bay at 6:47 p.m. Her crew and the researchers aboard walked down the gangway to a pier where representatives of their home institutions, the U.S. Navy, and the State Department were waiting. All 41 were assessed by medical personnel and cleared. All 41 were in contact with their families by 8 p.m. The chief scientist gave a brief statement to the assembled press pool that evening. He thanked the U.S. Navy. He noted that the survey data was excellent. He said he hoped to return to complete the full survey program. This is what happens when a military power mistakes the legal defenselessness of an unarmed research vessel for operational immunity. This is what happens when you seize 41 American civilians in international waters and calculate that the response will be measured in diplomatic notes and protest filings, rather than in SEAL operators fast roping from the gray sky and precision standoff missiles arriving over your pier before your reinforcements can even cast off their lines. The Silas Bent continued her survey. The South China Sea remained open. The 41 researchers and mariners who had been aboard went back to their work. The USS Ronald Reagan is still on station. She always is.